and welcome to this evening's study session. Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at broomfield.org. Our agenda this evening includes one study session item. Seeing there are no concept reviews on the agenda this evening, there will not be any public comment. You can watch the study session live on Channel 8 and through video streaming on broomfield.org/council meetings. For our hard of hearing residents present, we have wireless headsets available in the back of the council chambers through our AV team. Our only item this evening is a discussion of the 2026 draft budget. Consistent with Section 10.2 of Council's Procedures and Rules of Order. In this preliminary budget discussion, our primary objective is to foster a collective mindset of fiscal discipline and ensure all budgetary decisions remain aligned with our available revenue streams. Emphasis will be placed on applying a revenue filter to maintain current service levels and evaluate new requests. Council will be expected to view and assess requests in the context of prior discussions and agreed upon priorities. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. And joining us this evening is Director of Finance, Graham Clark. Jeff Romine is our economist. We've narrowed him down to just one title this evening. And our budget manager is Nathan Mosley. Gentlemen, I'm not sure which one of you is beginning the conversation. Mayor, and it'll be at council's discretion to determine if you want to ask questions as the presentation wraps or as we are segregating it from Jeff's presentation into Mr. Clark's presentation.
After Mr. Romine's presentation, I'll check in with council and see if they have some burning questions. Sound good, y'all? Okay. Mr. Romine.
Thank you, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. I am not going to speak about natural medicine, just so you know. I think he's pulling up the presentation. Thank you, by the way, for the direction you went, because that means I didn't have to create a third round of licensing, which I got to lead the first two. So I'm very happy with council's direction. So I think he's pulling it up. Mayor Pro Tem, and council members, next slide, please. We're going to run through, we're going to start with revenue. As you all have known, and as we have discussed many, many times, Broomfield has adjusted the way that we do budgets and the way that we think about our fiscal realities, where we start with revenue. It becomes the driving force for everything that we go forward with. So we live within our means is the best way to phrase that. It's something that we've been doing for a number of years, but this is probably the most public. So this is, if you recall, there was a council focus session. We gave you a preview of what we thought was going to go with on the economy. I will tell you, I was thinking on my walk right before now, I've had 3 really interesting periods of time where I've tried to think about the economy and think about revenues for a city and a county over the last 20 years. This is the third one. There was the Great Recession. There was the COVID pandemic and what might happen here. In both those cases, I will tell you, as I've looked at the data both from before and while I was here, Broomfield did very well during those periods of time compared to other communities. We relatively worked through those well. Many of you know, we actually saw a sales tax increase during the COVID period, which was an unusual. So as a county and a city, we fared better than most. I will preview that I don't think that's going to happen this time. It is my role for you and for the city manager. I don't have a constituency. I don't have a client necessarily that I'm trying to satisfy. So therefore, I take a conservative approach, not overly pessimistic, but a conservative approach, because I'm not trying to, show rainbows. I'm trying to tell you exactly what it's going to be like. And this allows Graham and Nathan to do the work that they need to do in order to make sure that we come through. So as part of this philosophy, of course, is if revenues come in better, that gives you some freedom in order to increase something or do something else. So right now we're trying to figure out where we're going to be. My last opening part of this is going to be There is a quote that I put at the very top of this. It's something I've been paying attention to lately. We are living in a very interesting age. There may be some orientation of this to Chinese proverb, but the first time I can really find it is some people suggest that actually it was a British quote who happened to be the ambassador to China as opposed to a Chinese. And so here's the quote for you. We are living in an age more fraught with insecurity than any of our present time. And I would say from an economy standpoint, that is probably true. So my last part of the opening is in February when we spoke to you, we talked about the economy and we talked about our fiscal place as being stable but fragile. You're going to see that that has now changed. We are fragile. I'm removing the stable part of it. So Mayor, that's the thumbnail sketch. At this point, I'm just going to go through some series of slides. I'm going to focus on a few, and then we're going to go into 4 revenue sources that are the primary drivers that we can talk about tonight. First off is the consensus is we're either in a period of stagflation or potentially even moving toward a recession. We did have the first quarter GDP come through, and it was at a negative 0.3%, which it takes traditionally economists look at it as 2 negative quarters in a row of the GDP potentially could trigger a recessionary period. So we're not quite there yet. And we're in periods of uncertainty, and that's really what is causing it. But fundamentally, when you pull away the uncertainty and you really focus at where the economy is, this is what stagflation means. It means current inflation is relatively low, although it is tended to move back. Some people are suggesting, depending on exactly what goes on with tariffs, we may see as much of it as an increase of 1-to-1 or 1.5% of an increase in inflation. Again, lots unknown about tariffs right now. Unemployment has been rising in the U.S. It is right now 4.2%. Here in Broomfield, it's closer to the 4.6, 4.7, which is a very high number from what we've seen over the last 5 years. I will note, just because I put the numbers up there, that is what's called U3, which is the traditional unemployment measure. Some people like to use U6, especially in periods of uncertainty, because that includes people that are beyond just, the U3 is very specific in the sense of people looking for work or unemployed, those types of people. U6 is a bit more inclusive, so that includes people that are working part-time that would like to have full-time jobs, as an example. So it's a better measure of kind of the economic difficulty that some families may be facing because they may have jobs, but they may be working 30 hours or 25 instead of the 40 that they were hoping to find. Interest rates right now are at 4.2%. The Federal Reserve Bank yesterday decided that they were not going to move interest rates again. But there is speculation that we'll see likely 1 to 2 interest rate cuts this year, likely one maybe in the midsummer. And then we'll talk more about that. At the same time that I'm saying that about the US, let me just tell you, there are a number of countries that are in recession around the world. Some are staggering, some are working okay. As an example, China's GDP tends to be in the 6 to 7%. They are now in the 3 to 4% range right now. And that may go lower depending once again on tariffs. So what you've got is a world economy that is actually not doing as well as even the US's economy right now. So therefore the headwinds are in front of us. Next slide, please. I'm just going to talk through some of these things, but really I'm focusing much more on the local side. So we're already seeing a pullback of the consumer spending. We're seeing that in some of the mixed data we've seen over the first 2 months of this year, and just the way it's going, we have to watch it. So this is the beginning of our information. You're going to see updates to this revenue forecast as well as the budget when we come back to you in September and in August when we talk about the budget more formally in August and then present it in September and October. But this is that first really this really more informed snapshot. We are seeing reduced and delayed business investments. We're hearing that from a number of businesses anecdotally. We're seeing it in a number of ways. There is drawbacks both on the residential side and the commercial side, so both sides. Interest rates are remaining high, and that is impacting our consumers. And then the other part of it that you oftentimes don't read about, because we oftentimes read the headlines that talk about the 30-year fixed mortgage or the 10-year treasury notes. But underneath there is also the what we would call the consumable credit. And that is the things like your car financing, but most importantly, your credit card financing. So the delay in payments is starting to increase on the credit card side. And in some cases, those interest rates are at the 24% range. So even though we're talking about the normal traded interest rates, whenever I put them up, recognize that for people that are now starting to struggle with making their credit card payments, the 100% credit card payments, and they're only paying portion or not paying all, they are being hit with much more significant interest rates right now. And that is definitely affecting their consumer patterns as well as their pocketbooks. I talk about that the unemployment rate is expected to rise. I think that's true for the metro area. Something that we've normally not seen, where this metro area in Colorado has tended to be lower than the nation. I think we're going to see the reverse. That Colorado is going to be a little bit higher than the nation. And in fact, this metro area is going to be higher than the state in part. And then let's bring it all the way home. We're hearing about both federal cuts, private sector cuts, and those federal cuts include the labs that we see that are in Golden and Boulder. Here's the reality of that. Yes, they are going to affect the Boulder economy and the Golden and Lakewood, but they're also going to affect Broomfield. Because if you're working in a federal lab in Boulder, you're probably living in Broomfield or Longmont or somewhere else. You're not probably living in a $1.5 million or $2 million house in Boulder. You're living in the Broomfields and the Longmonts and the Westminsters. So we're likely going to see some impacts on our localized unemployment more dramatically than you would expect. The next four bullets are really a bit of a preview. We don't have specifics on that. So what you're going to hear me say several times is there are places I just don't know yet, and we're not going to know. So as an example, the president has announced certain tariffs that he's putting in place in order to encourage the economy to move in certain ways, both short-term and long-term. Some of those, though, he has put a 90-day moratorium on. So we are 60 days away from that moratorium coming off, and I don't know what's going to happen with them. We don't know what's going to happen with the federal cuts because we are not expecting another continuing resolution on the federal budget. We expect a new budget sometime in June to August to be formulated. There is some people saying that we'll see it as soon as June. I'll let you decide whether you think that the Congress is going to move that rapidly and have a budget within about 30 days, or if you think it's really going to be formed over the summer and be going for votes in August and September. Again, as many of you know, the federal fiscal year ends on September 30th and starts on October 1st. So that's really what we're going to be seeing. And so what those federal cuts may be, we're hearing a lot, but we don't know much. And so that's part of what the challenges are for all of us, both at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, I'm sure, is paying attention, watching, but not necessarily overreacting one direction or the other because we just don't know. So it's a lot of paying attention. The same is true for the state budget. As you know, the state legislature adjourned yesterday. Did pass a budget, a balanced budget as they're required to do. They did cover their $1.2 roughly million budget gap. However, they've already indicated that next year there will be a budget gap again. So it's not a long-term solution. It was the let's solve this year's solution. So I raised that to those last four bullet points. I always have to do this because in the reality is our role is not to just look at 3 years, but to look further out. We are in a very good position. We have some of the primary industries everybody is trying to attract. We have them operating here. We have one of the leading quantum computing companies in the world right here in Broomfield that has expanded 3 times. It has now expanded a 4th time to open up a facility in New Mexico. They have operating quantum computing. It's not theoretical anymore. They have operating computers. At the same time, we have a photonics which is the other side of that. We have AI being materialized and all of those things come together. And in 20 years from now, we will talk about that in the same way that we talked about the computer revolution of what's going on in the Silicon Valley. US, this state, this region is in a strong position on those. It is a highly competitive environment, but we are there right now. And that's a good foundation for us to build on for the next few years. Additionally, we have positioned a number of investments into our key market areas. And those are now coming forward. They've been talked about for a number of years, but as you know, from the updates you've received from developers, and we have another one in June, you're going to see more updates and we're going to see actual movement because in the case of Mace Ridge, as an example, in the Flatirons Crossing, they have their equity investor. They have their capital stack. They're not going out into the market now. So they are definitely moving forward and they have the cash in hand to do that. Next slide, please. You've seen these slides before. They're in your packets. And so this is just that raw data, just so you can see it. There's the national, the Colorado economy, so you can compare it. You can see the unemployment rates, the wages, et cetera. Next slide, please. Broomfield, we break it up into two parts just because of the way the data works. And just as a reminder, the left side is really, it's the population side. So that's the resident side. So when we talk about employment and unemployment and those types of things, those are based upon the residents that live here. On the other side in the darker blue, that is that's the businesses that are centered here. We have had a slight decrease in our employment over the last year here in Broomfield. That's because of some of those early condition layoffs, but also Lumen, as an example, did move its employees from Broomfield down to Denver. And those are the regional employees as well as the local employees. So we have had some reduction in that employment. So that's the most recent data, which was Q3 2024. And you can see the concentration in those key industries I already mentioned. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have 4 primary revenue sources for the general fund and from that side. And this is coming from the consumers. This is coming from our businesses. This is coming from our side. So I'm not going to be talking about federal grants. I'm not going to be talking about highway users tax funds nor severance fund. Those are things that right now are being worked through. Some of those actually were part of the legislative budget changes that were passed. So what I'm talking about is just the things that impact us very directly. These are our general fund revenue sources. And I'm going to talk about each of them in a little bit of detail. So to start out, and they'll be laid out in exactly the same manner. There are 2 slides, so there's 2 on each slide. So first off, sales tax, which is our largest revenue source for the city and county of Broomfield in the sense of the general fund. We are now expecting sales tax to be flat for 2025. So if you recall, from the 24 to 25, we were expecting and budgeted an increase. So what you'll see is the 2025 R, that's the revised number. It is down. We're estimating that it's going to be flat. So therefore we have a $3 million reduction from the previous approved budget, your 2025 budget. That's what I'm showing you in the percent or in the parens. So we're expecting to be 79.3. So again, compared to what you passed for the existing budget, we are expecting a $3 million reduction from the amount that was passed in the budget. That came in part because of what has evolved, especially in the fourth quarter and in the first quarter of 2025, but the fourth quarter, and as we've watched it come through. So we ended the year 2024 on a positive note, but as we look forward, we see a lot of uncertainty in sales tax revenue, both because of short-term tariffs or midterm tariffs, as well as just those kinds of hurdles that a number of businesses, many of you have heard, and you've all become, it's interesting. I think I could say almost to a person, almost everybody in this country has now gotten a master's degree in economics in tariffs. So congratulations, you now get to put the hood on, but you have all gotten, I was talking to somebody earlier, I don't think I've spent as much time talking about tariffs in 10, I'm going to be wrong on this, but roughly 10 years of graduate school and undergraduate, and a lot of it in economics, like I have for the last month. And so that's what we're expecting, and that is what's happening. We have seen in some cases the early returns from some of those businesses here in Broomfield are actually below the previous year. So we don't expect that to continue, but as you can imagine, one of those was the grocery sector. Again, we have 3 King Soopers. King Soopers, if you recall, in February, there was a strike. So therefore, we saw the levels for all 3 of those King Soopers fall down, and some of that shopping went to other places, including places outside of Broomfield. We expect that to return as we see the March and April receipts come in. But those are the types of things that we're paying attention to. It's that granular at this point, and that's really where we need to be from the work we're doing. Consumers are adjusting their purchases. We have seen, and I've looked at the national data, it's a little more difficult to look at the localized data, but March auto sales were up. Obviously, many of you have heard that, and even the late February ones, and people anticipating the tariffs that were being put in place, the 25% tariffs. So it was net neutral, we'll say, for the first month and a half. Then it was very positive for March, but every major analyst and forecaster in the auto sales is suggesting that was a pre-buy, and we're going to see some softness. And then the question is how much more softness depends on exactly where those tariffs go. So I can't predict exactly what that's going to be, but we're trying to anticipate what that looks like. And so we're seeing a flattening there also, and I'll talk about that in the next bullets. But just to give you that example of durable appliances and other things, those are the things people are actually trying to get ahead of potential tariff impacts. Service purchases are expected to fall. And what's really going on is because of the change in consumer behavior and this happens every time, whenever we see a major change in the stock values, people draw back a little bit. It's normal behavior. So the consumer sentiment indexes from the University of Michigan and the consumer confidence indexes have all been shrinking pretty substantially over the last quarter. So therefore, what we see is that $3 million reduction this year. We expect a little bit of a return in 2026. So I'm estimating about a $1.2 million increase in sales tax next year. So that's where we see the 25 and 26. We actually look at 27 and it looks a little better going further out, but that's where we're focusing right now is the 25 and 26. Moving on to use taxes. So use taxes, we oftentimes talk about that, and I've talked about it, and you'll see in the budget books, we talk about use taxes, and we primarily have been focusing on building materials use tax. Turns out for the last couple of years, as I've really dug into the data, our use tax on vehicles now outstrips our use tax on building materials. So the city back in the we'll call it the aughts, what we saw is we had a smaller population and a higher building activity. So our use tax on building materials was substantially higher than our use tax on vehicles. A use tax, I apologize, I probably skipped and I shouldn't have done that. Let me tell you again, remind you what a use tax is. It's the sales tax that you pay. However, it's collected by the business in a different way. And so it's paid based upon not the business location, but the consumer location. So this use tax is being applied to businesses, we'll say in Denver. If you bought a car in Denver or up in Boulder or up in Fort Collins, you would pay a sales tax on that car. It's referred to by us and everybody else as what's called a use tax, but it's effectively a sales tax. You pay it, but you pay it to the home community where you're going to garage your vehicle. Even if you park on the street, it's still called garaging. So the use tax is effectively the sales tax. So what we're seeing is with the population being the level it is, our use tax on vehicles, when you purchase a vehicle, no matter where you do it, is being paid to Broomfield, and that's what's represented here. So, and then the other side of it is we've all bought cars and we pay that licensing fee. In that licensing fee that you do each year, there's something called the specific ownership tax. You'll see it on there. And that's the thing that when you first buy a car, you pay, we'll call it $800 for simplicity's sake, to license your car. And then as you keep that car, all of a sudden your car licensing goes down to like $200 or $300. That's because the specific ownership tax is falling because it's the depreciated value of your car. So those two things really are related to the vehicle. So one side is the purchase, the other side is the ownership. So as we see people perhaps holding onto their cars longer, we would expect the specific ownership tax, even though it's depreciating, to be more substantial compared to the other. If we see more sales activity, more or less everybody's out buying cars because the interest rate's low and you're getting $500 off or whatever, that's going to affect your use tax. So that's what we're talking about, how those two fit together and why I combine them here. You can see that I'm expecting about a $500,000 reduction in 2025 R. So the revised numbers from what we had originally forecasted. And then you can see we've got a further reduction. Obviously, if tariffs come in or interest rates adjust significantly in either of those two cases, we'll relook at that and you will hear us talk about that come August. So you can see exactly what's going on. I've done a fair amount of research over the last week and a half to just understand where the dynamics are of the marketplace and what's going on. Next slide, please. Moving to the other two primary one, I've already talked about the use tax building materials. We're not expecting much of a change there because we've already forecasted a slowed building season for 2025. We're not expecting much difference there. It's primarily several buildings that are bringing that forward, a number of housing units. And so what we're seeing is that's going to probably stay stabilized. And then we expect it to pick up a little bit next year because again, most of the analysts are suggesting we're going to see 1 to 2 interest rate cuts in the next year. We've also got some other things that are coming forward, including some of our major projects. They'll be coming forward on building permits. So that's why we see the use tax staying the way we do and then talking about where we're going. So let me move to property tax because this is why we move from stable to fragile. And I just want to spend a few minutes here because 2 things happened. So first off, we did have a slight adjustment. Manager Hoffman did send you an email about Lumen and that they had gone through a court appeal and therefore they had been able to lower their valuation, which has resulted in some reductions. It wasn't the full $500,000, but I'm estimating between everything and we're going to see about a $500,000 reduction in 2025 R. Reminder to all of you, many of you pay your property taxes, or if you're renting, you're paying your property tax through your rent. Property taxes in 2025 are the taxes that are due from 2024. They're collected in 2025. So therefore, that's why they're so stable. We can see them even when we're billing. So we did have to reissue some new bills to Lumen, as an example, when they got that reevaluation through the court system. But generally speaking, that's the number we expect. Further, we collect it all because if we don't, then it goes into what's called a tax sale in a particular way. I'm not going to go into great detail there, but effectively we get 100% compliance on our property taxes. So therefore, what we bill, we're going to collect. And so we're pretty good about that. However, you'll see a $6 million reduction between 25 and 26. So this is that early signal to you of what we're going to be talking about in the 26 budget process, because that's what we're in right now. And so this is this is a little bit different than we've done in the past. We've added this meeting in order for you to understand what we're doing from a revenue standpoint and what the resulting direction that's coming from the city manager and the finance department to the departments. Here's why we're seeing a $6 million reduction. So first off, as a reminder, the legislature did some changes at the end of last session, and then they called a special session in August. It reduced the assessment values and made some other changes. So the first off is we went from what was closer to a 6.9 or 6.8 level down, and we're going to drop in next year into a 6.25 rate for assessments on residential. Then we'll move back up to 6.4 the following year, so the 2027 collections. But in 2026, our residential is going to be assessed at 6.25 of the valuation. So that's about we had estimated, and I'd shared with you before when all that was going through, if you recall back in September when we talked about this, that it'd be roughly a $3 million hit. Well, now you see it's a $6 million hit. The second side of it is the assessor has now completed the assessments. Those ended on June 30th, 2024. So now those values have come through. Taxpayers are receiving that notice of valuation last week and this week. They should be receiving it. They all get mailed out. And so all the taxpayers, both commercial and residential, are all getting that. Overall in Broomfield, we're seeing about a 5% reduction. In the retail market, for the retail properties, it's actually flat. Jay and his team has suggested that overall the retail sector is about flat. Office is down 10%. So when you look at it, it's going to be that. Again, you will see some property tax value or some valuations being above -5. They'll be 5 or 10, or in some cases even 20% above previous levels. There's reasons for that, and I'm not here to go through all of that detail. But part of it is obviously it's different parts of the community. Not every home is the same. Different things have different valuations. We're seeing market activity being positive in some ways and flat or negative in other ways on price. And so this is reflective of the values on June 30th, 2024. You'll hear me say that date so many times because Jay asked me to make sure we keep saying it's not the valuations of today or the day that the valuations were sent out, but the day that the law says that we were supposed to set them. So what the result is we're including a 5% in overall property tax valuation and the reductions in assessment rates. So those two things are coming through, and that's going to result in a roughly an 8 to 9% reduction in property tax. As you can calculate for yourselves, we're showing it to be roughly about 9 to 10 overall, depending on exactly how everything flows through. Part of it is the appeal process for valuations will begin now. We don't know exactly how that's going to look. If you recall 2 years ago when we were in this period of time, we had record numbers of residents coming to appeal the valuation. We expect perhaps record numbers of commercial to appeal this time for various reasons. We don't know, but we just have to anticipate that. And so the staff is looking to think through how we are in a position to do that. But nevertheless, we've got a $6 million reduction. It will then recover in the following year. Last thing I would just mention is that's where we are today. This, some other things may affect that property tax, but really we pretty much know what it's going to look like now, what we think we're going to be seeing billing going out for. And so I'm going to stop there and get ready to move on to my last set, which is the final summary. So that goes through the 4 revenue things. Mayor, if I could, I just want to summarize. You can see what will happen overall, where we're going to reduce our revenues for this year by $3.5 million because of the things I've just mentioned. In 2026, we're going to reduce revenues again, roughly about $4 million overall because of the combination of the lower property tax, but the increase in sales tax and the building material use tax. So we're going to see those kind of float around like that. And then you could see a little bit, I've got a little bit of a, hey, let's look way off into the future and it's going to get brighter. But it's not going to get brighter at least until early 27 and likely 28 for sure. That's my estimates at this point in my forecasting. On the economic outlook, you can see the outlines of the things I've talking about, and these are the key things I mentioned at the very beginning. So at that, Mayor, that's kind of the summary slide. So again, where I conclude is we have moved from stable but fragile into fragile. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Romine. I appreciate that. And that was a lot to process. So I'm going to ask my colleagues, did you want to ask questions on this part? Does anybody have any questions or do you want to keep going to Graham's or
Mayor, I guess then I'm going to, Nathan Mosley.
well, I don't see anybody that has a question right now. So let's move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. My name is Nathan Mosley. I'm the budget manager here for Broomfield. I'll be kicking off the budget outlook portion of the presentation tonight. Then I'll be handing it over to Graham Clark to go into some additional details, and we'll wrap up with comments and questions that you have for any of us. So next slide, please. So in the past, I've described the budget as a marathon and not a sprint. It really takes a methodical, intentional year-round approach in order to prepare and review, adjust, and then adopt the budget. During the prepare phase, we're reviewing prior year actuals, beginning planning and waiting for audited numbers so that we can ensure we have a solid foundation to begin our planning. During this time, we also kick off the budget process with our internal staff, and we use that to kind of set expectations as well as talking to them about the challenges or opportunities we might be facing through the current budget cycle. During this time, the budget team also prepares all the necessary documents and forms that our staff needs in order to submit their budget requests. And we also set the overall schedule for the budget development process. That way we stay on track, meet our deadlines, and departments aren't kind of caught off guard by any of the expectations that they have throughout the process. So currently, if you look at the slide, we're kind of between the prepare and review portion. Right now, departments have submitted their base budgets. So those are basically for their operational expenditures. They are working with us on any supplemental requests they might have. We have indicated to them that supplemental requests or kind of new initiatives or new programs are going to be really hard to fit into the budget, but we still do have that as an option for them. So they are due mid-May. As Jeff has talked, we are finalizing those revenue projections to see how those will impact our ability to provide our services going forward. So all of these data points kind of allow us to move into the adjust phase, and we adjust expenditures as needed and prepare the proposed budget for council and the community for consideration when we bring that to you in early September. Then the annual budget is traditionally adopted in October. Next slide, please. As we were finalizing our revised 25 revenues and establishing 26 revenues, I thought this slide could be helpful in showcasing how reliant Broomfield is on property sales and use taxes. So between those three, it makes up over half of the revenue that supports general fund services. So general fund operations include things like your police, library, human services, clerk and recorder, as well as internal services like finance, IT, and HR. So we're very reliant on those three revenues in order to provide those services. Based on the current economic uncertainties, both locally and nationally, we are projecting that these revenues, as Jeff said, will be negatively impacted. This impact has consequences to our budget, and we use the budget process to address these. And Graham will go into a bit more detail about some of the strategies that we're going to be using to address these revenue impacts. On the slide, you'll see charges for services is another really large component of our revenue for the organization. In the general fund, these revenues are primarily generated by our recreation department. These fees help reduce general fund expenditures to support those activities. So think of them as kind of an offset to providing recreational facilities and programming. In our enterprise funds, charges for services are the only revenue sources that they get. So those are borne by the users of the system and are used to cover the cost of operating, maintaining, and expanding those services. So there have been questions in previous study sessions and council meetings about the potential of using general funds to help minimize the percent increase we might see for enterprise funds. We want to remind that this is not recommended as it's not a best practice. And based on our current projections, we don't think it's feasible to use general funds to help over the next 24 months because of the economic uncertainty. Next slide. This slide shows kind of how we address budget development process from the most basic viewpoint. On the left, you can see our revenues. So our revenues include both fund balances as well as estimated revenues. And these are basically what we consider our resources available to the organization on the left-hand side of the slide. On the right, we have our planned expenses. So we always begin with our revenues, our resources, and adjust expenses to ensure a balanced budget. We don't start with our expenditures and then work backwards and try to adjust our revenues to meet the planned expenditures. This helps ensure that we have long-term fiscal sustainability. Next slide, please. So because fiscal sustainability is a core community and organizational goal, we follow the following components to help guide the development of the budget through this annual process. So again, as illustrated on the previous slide, we start with revenues, and that informs our ability to fund programs and services for the community. As Jeff was up here tonight, I mean, we work hand in hand with Jeff, city manager's office, the assessor, and others in the organization to develop realistic revenue projections. We also want to make sure that we're sharing the lens in which we're looking at the budget and kind of the challenges that we're facing. And so one of the goals of this evening is to share that lens that we're looking at budget development with city council and make sure that we're in alignment there. You know, our goal for 2026 in the budget is to maintain current service levels and by doing so, limit new initiatives, but hopefully that will make sure that we can maintain current service levels to the best of our ability. Finally, on this slide, utilizing the bucket methodology that we've implemented over the last several years, this provides kind of a shared nomenclature that we have with each other within the organization. So we really want to focus our budgets on mandates, obligations, and critical obligations. That concept's even more important now, given the economic environment. Next slide. So using the bucket methodology, that approach has served us well over the past couple of years. It's kind of led to a solid financial footing for the organization and has resulted in some of the fiscal successes highlighted on the slide, but we can't rest on those successes, and we have to be intentional and disciplined over the next 2 years to ensure we can continue to meet the critical needs of the community and remain financially stable during these uncertain times. Next slide. This slide highlights some of the specific areas we're focused on during the 2026 budget development process. So some highlights, I won't go through everything since it's a pretty extensive list, but we're definitely focused on grant funding opportunities. We get a lot of grant funding, and so we're continually monitoring our state and federal partners just to make sure any changes that might be coming down the pike that we're first to know about those. But right now, we're not expecting. We believe things will be status quo based on the information that we have right now. Operational reserves, we want to maintain our 20% goal. We've increased that over the past couple of years from 16.67% to 20%. So we want to maintain that. We are working on implementation of a new enterprise resource planning tool. So this will replace our legacy enterprise system. To replace this, it's going to improve our accuracy, improve functionality for everybody within the organization, and also provide more transparency to council and residents. We'll also be planning on issuing several bonds this year or in 2026. So we're currently planning on issuing general obligation bonds for the PD and courts expansion, and then 2 bonds for water and wastewater projects. Next slide, please. So this slide kind of focuses on our capital improvement process. So as part of the annual budget process, we also develop and update our 5-year CIP plan. Many of these projects span multiple years, so having a 5-year outlook helps provide a more holistic view of these funds. Each project is evaluated and scored based on a number of different criteria. Some of those criteria might include equity, so where a project is located within the community, overall public benefit, safety of the community, or maybe ability to leverage grant funding. So there's a number of different criteria that we rate projects on, but this scoring is utilized in addition to the bucket methodology of mandates, obligation, and critical needs. And that helps us prioritize projects and focus our resources on what matters most. We also discuss with staffing to see what their availability is and what they can actually accomplish. So we're trying to layer that in as well to make sure that we're not putting too many projects into the queue that we can't get to those. And as we go through this process, some programs or projects are identified that they're not actually needed because another project is actually fulfilling that need. And so one example is the I-25 sub-area plan. So we are doing a comprehensive plan update. So we've postponed the I-25 sub-area plan to focus on a different project right now. Next slide. Another focus area of the annual budget process is related to our enterprise fund. So we came recently and did the first quarter update to council and the community on the enterprise funds. In 2025, we also accelerated the budget process for those funds. And this was in an effort to develop those budgets and the corresponding rate recommendations earlier in the year. So this will help with earlier communication to council and other stakeholders in the community. As mentioned earlier, we're planning on issuing 2 bonds to finance large-scale long-term infrastructure projects, including the water tanks and phase 1 of the wastewater facility expansion. Our plan is to come to City Council in July for the second quarterly update and provide rate recommendations at that time. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Graham Clark to cover some of the other strategies and actions that we're taking to address anticipated financial constraints in 2026 budget.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mosley.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graham Clark, Finance Director. James, can you go back to slide 10? I'm going to spend a little time here. Nathan touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to touch on more the budget cycle. As we look at the budget cycle, we're just now finalizing the 2024 actuals with the auditors. They're in the field now. They're on site. Solid 2024 actuals are not available until now. And this is because many of our revenues are delayed for 2 months, like especially our sales and use tax. We don't usually get that until mid-March. We then spend the month, for the next month, paying final expenditures and finalizing the fiscal year end close before the auditors get here in late April. So, we use this information. We use the 2024 final revenues, the 2025 year-to-date revenues that we've received so far, along with Jeff's projections and the property tax assessment numbers that come in early May. And it's only now that we get a good 2026 revenue projection. At the same time, finance is analyzing these revenue projections. As Nathan mentioned, the departments are concurrently formulating their own budgets by themselves, which we're just now getting and will get for the next week or two. Next slide. As Jeff mentioned, we'll go back to slide 19, please, James. As Jeff mentioned, there are challenges ahead. Even prior to the most recent property tax assessment decreases that came last week, we had already been preparing for numerous cost-saving measures. Realignments of existing budgeted dollars will continue to be emphasized in department and budget meetings. We are also looking to reduce budgets for travel and training and possible recalibration of employee merit increases. We know we will need to dig deeper based on this latest revenue decrease that we got last week. This will continue to be an iterative process as we continue budget development. We will take the revenue projections and continue with various reductions until we get a structurally sound budget by September. This revenue and budget challenge will require courageously delivering results together, collaborating as staff and also with council. The next 24 months will require a lot of financial discipline. Next slide. So, slide 20. Personnel costs are the organization's largest expense. We intend to look at these costs over the next month. As mentioned, we'll reduce the travel and training budgets. We're also going to be looking at professional services to see if there are any opportunities to reduce that line item, which is pretty large in our budget. There will certainly be little flexibility, and we will have limited additions for the next 24 months. In talking to others around the Front Range, many other local governments are in a similar situation to Broomfield. Next slide. So in terms of the next steps, the department budgets will continue to come into finance over the next couple of weeks, and the collaboration will continue for the month of May. Jeff and I will be back with you with an update in August. And at that point, we will have done most of the work on the budget in order to get a good draft for the early September preliminary draft, which is usually around Labor Day. In late September, there will be 2 study sessions with department heads present to address any changes for 2026. And then lastly, in October, we will have the first and second reading of the budget. Next slide. So with the help of CMO, finance is monitoring changes that are coming from the federal and state level. There are signs that these changes could lead local governments to have to provide more of the financial backfill. So far, Broomfield has not incurred negative effects from the tariffs or reduction of federal grants. But we will continue to monitor tariffs, the federal grant situation, along with the potential loss of municipal bond tax exempt status. All these are very fluid, and we monitor and update the draft budget on a weekly basis. That concludes this evening's presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. We will go to council questions. I'll wait. Councilmember Lim.
I have some specific questions. Slide 15. It points to the general obligation for police/courts. I thought the courts was delayed. I found that surprising to have courts listed there.
The courts is only delayed until we can get them moved out into the next, until we get police into their building and that gets going, and then the courts shortly thereafter.
So it will be the new building and the renovation will be bonded together?
There will maybe be a need to do additional court remodel and fold that into partially the bond for the police building.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Clark, talk, excuse me, Councilmember Lim, talk a little bit about why the timing. When you have a bond that's issued, you have to spend those funds on that item in a particular period of time. So it's difficult to be able to say you're going to do all things at once, particularly from a staff perspective. We don't have the capacity in order to make both of those things happen at the same time. So the spend down of the court remodel bond would be separate based on the timing that we're getting right now from the design and developer of the new PD building. But again, it's the communicate early and often, indicating that something is going to happen with those courts. We don't have a sense of those finances yet because we haven't gone into design phase. We haven't allocated money for the design phase, but we know that the court expansion will have to occur as well. So we continue to, while we don't have that specification of the information, continue to have that conversation that something is going to have to happen.
On slide 17, there's an indication that you expect the bond rating our bond rating to improve further, is the impression I'm getting. And we just had an upgrade on our bond rating.
Yeah, no,
Am I interpreting that correctly, that you expect?
no, nothing
higher
further, nothing further at this point. It's just a reiteration of what happened last year.
Okay, thanks. When you say you expect you're going to target travel and training reduction, saving 50% of that, how much is that?
That's about $1 million.
$1 million, okay. I understand that you're going to have to look at the CIP projects closely to determine if they'll still go forward as planned. I find it time consuming, let's say, because I do take out the budget from last year where we have the long-term, the CIP project is in this year and
Right.
That. I find it time consuming to go back to the previous CIP long-term plan and compare it to the next year's CIP plan to see what moved. And you're indicating there might be even more of that movement than usual.
Correct.
So I'm going to want to take out the previous year all the more, and spend this much time as I usually do looking at it.
Yep.
So is there any way that we can not have to spend quite that much time, that you can indicate to us, hey, this moved from the previous year. It moved 2 years out. It moved 1 year out. So that we don't have to compare from year to year.
Yes, something that I've seen in the past is like highlighting that a different color, indicating that it's changed. It's difficult to get that all into one kind of spreadsheet, but we can work on some reporting that could potentially make it easier for you.
Okay, that would be great, and from my perspective. Okay. From my assignment to the workforce, I know that it's possible part of these federal cuts could be funding to workforce. And it's possible these federal cuts to the workforce center could come at the same time as unemployment rises. So we would actually have slightly more demand on the workforce center. At the same time, they don't have as much trickle down funds through the state, the Fed state down to our center. So has staff thought about, how we would possibly deal with that if that happens? Because certainly when we say we can't increase our service levels it's very possible we'll have more people in our workforce service center with less resources then.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We look at it a couple different ways. If there's any silver lining to the financial situation we're in, the HHS fund, which it's got its own mill and it's able to be kind of have its own set aside fund, does have a little bit of fund balance. So we do plan to absorb potentially some, and by the way, fund balance is different than reserves. Okay. So fund balance is money that's left over after reserves. So reserves are always taken kind of off the top. Okay. So they've got their 15% reserves, that particular fund does. And on top of that, they have additional fund balance. And so we will do, we'll do the back and forth. We'll be talking to, the HHS folks quite a bit to make sure we come back with a structurally sound budget. And knowing that could happen, but we also don't want to play the game of what ifs too much because that takes up a lot of our time. And so we don't want to chase too many what if situations. And we want to be very calculated and methodical in how we look at what ifs because it can take up a lot of staff's time, which we do not have, especially on the finance side. So, but that's how we're looking at that particular fund.
Okay, thank you. And then I had a question, actually, I think it would go back to Mr. Romine. Generally, you said you're more optimistic about the 27-28 budget, but I'm not quite clear why. I mean, it's good news, but I'm not clear why.
Mayor, Pro Tem council members. So as we look, there's several things all playing into when I do these revenue forecasts. One of them is what we see development coming. And the types of things and the timing of it. So as an example, with the Mace Ridge development, the Flatirons Crossing, several of those restaurants as well as the others will be coming online in late 26, early 27. So we'll have new facilities opening up that will likely draw people in from other parts of the community or other parts of the metro area. And so as we look at the land use plans and what we see coming in from a development standpoint over the next 4 or 5 years, those that we feel more secure about and safe about, those will be coming on in late 26 and 27. So I'd mentioned it kind of as the sunlight off in the distance, but the reality is when I did this forecast, I actually looked out through 28. To see when I thought we'd see some changes. So we'll see auto sales because you can drive an older car for a number of years, but at some point you have to buy again. You can see sales tax coming back up. The unemployment will likely, reset. So there's some short-term things that are coming on all at one time, and that's what's causing us. Also, what we'll see is the property tax, we change a little bit and adjust a little bit. So we'll see some of the recovery in the property tax. I estimate, again, very conservative, but a 2% increase annually in values of property going forward. We've experienced, looking backwards, as much as 8 and 10% in a given year. Right now, we're seeing a negative 5% roughly. So that's a negative 2% per year. And I reverse that and see a 2%, which is pretty conservative when you look at this metro area. So when I look out 27 and 28 on those 4 revenue models, I see them coming back and we'll see a positive, probably $6 to $7 million going each forward. So it's understanding both the development side and the economic side at the same time. So I know it's a long answer, but that's why I'm actually pretty positive. I'm optimistic, but I'm also conservatively optimistic in going in 27, 28. Could it break even better? Possibly, but I'd rather be, here's where we're going to be, here's where we're going to be. And it does grow though. It grows about 3% a year in most of those revenue sources.
Do we know that Mace Ridge has retail leases signed?
They will be coming to you on June 3rd. They will be talking about several of them. We actually are in pre-app and some other conversations with some of those developments. As you know, and it's been highlighted, Pinterest has already made the decision that construction will be starting soon. There are restaurants that are signed. they will be coming on June 3rd and he'll be revealing some of those to you. I communicated with him yesterday, actually. And he feels has ability to be able to reveal some of those on the 3rd. So we're seeing positive movement in some of those key developments.
Okay, great. Thank you. Those are my questions.
All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Ward.
Thank you, Mayor. I have, guess we'll start with this question and go from there. I know you all mentioned the uncertainty with the federal budget, and obviously we have certain programs that we administer, such as Medicaid, that are heavily dependent on kind of what the federal government does, because Colorado is a Medicaid expansion state. And actually 6 days ago, President Trump's administration just put forth their proposed budget plan with some significant cuts. When we go through our budget plan, particularly for programs in public health, health and human, or just health and human services in general, do we follow what kind of is happening at the federal level to be somewhat, maybe attempt to be proactive, or are we being more reactive with, we'll wait and see what they actually come up with?
Councilmember Ward, I'm going to take that one. And then Grant, we have this conversation daily. And it kind of goes back to Councilmember Lim's question on the workforce. So it's twofold. One is psychological, and the other one is actually digging in on the what ifs. So we have been attuned to the what ifs for the last 100 days. We have not had anything come to fruition. The steps in order to go through whatever the worst case scenario is, there's a lot of them that have to occur first. So again, psychologically for our staff, keeping them focused on the work at hand is really primary. Secondarily, there are so many what ifs that are out there. If you can't really pick and choose which one, whether workforce is more important than the Medicaid, which is more important than the childcare, which is more important than, I mean, again, that social service network. If one of them has to be planned for, we'll look at it collectively. And then that decision will impact other decisions, including service level impacts. So when we say this budget, other than internally with the steps that we're proactively taking, we're not waiting in order to solve for what we know is going to be a $6 million work problem. So again, we are working to solve the knowns and planning for, it's not a plan B or a plan C. It's to what degree when staff has to come back to council to say, what in fact are the priorities? So here's the finite pot of funds, and whether it's service level and or what isn't going to happen in order to supply that support network will be conversations that we'll have in depth when we're prepared to have those.
Okay. And just to clarify on that, whenever the federal government actually gets around to finalizing its actual budget for fiscal year 2026 or 25-26, and there will be cuts. I know there's going to be cuts, particularly to health and human service stuff with Medicaid, home, probably CBDG, and stuff like that. Once staff has finalized kind of what those impacts to us directly are going to be, because the state's not going to be able to absorb any of those costs
Correct.
at all. Is it going to be staff kind of sits down and comes up with recommendations for council, or is staff going to just come back and we do a whole separate study session, for example, about here's what's being cut. If we want to absorb any of those costs, where would you like us to start shifting money around? Like, what is that process going to look like for us?
I think it's a hybrid process. So the level of degree if in fact the cuts are realized, is not going to be something that staff is going to be able to solve for. So I would certainly anticipate between council and the community having several study sessions on what does this look like short-term and what does this look like long-term. So again, the conversations that we're having now, back to the optimistic nature. So from the exec team, it's fascinating. You have half of them that are ultra conservative, and half of them that are realistic with a shade of optimism. And collectively, when we come to the same estimates, we know that we're right on the money. Solving for a short term until we can get some of our development that's approved, right? So it's not just optimistic, it's a timing issue that we're solving for. Those federal cuts that may come, that's not short term. It's a different mindset. It's a different group of individuals at the table. It's much more systemic and less about programs and initiatives. So it's a much deeper, broader conversation that will, again, it's not a one-time study session that has a B, C, or D. Those are much more fundamental to 5 to 8 years of what that ripple effect looks like.
Those are all my questions for right now. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I don't know why I just have this question that popped up while my colleagues are thinking. The urban, Broomfield Urban Transit Village, the 2 parcels where the event center was and the parking center, those are our properties, right? We own them.
Mayor, we own one of them. The city and county of Broomfield owns one and Borough owns one. So the further one south, just to the south side of the Arista community, that is owned by the city and county of Broomfield. And
The
it's
overflow
roughly
lot?
about 10 acres. Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
former overflow lot. The 12 acres that is sitting where the former event center used to be, that is now cleared, that is owned by Borough. And if you recall, that's
Yeah, a little more
that's theirs.
complicated with the
Yeah.
balloon payment, yeah. But the other parcel, so I know it's going through BidNet right now and you're going through RFPs. These are going to be for sale to a potential developer, right? We're going to sell them.
So the RFP that we issued at the direction of Borough and City Council, it was just on the former event center site. The one to the further south, we did not put that out for bid or for BidNet. So that is something that we could pursue and move toward a sale. It would, and so those are the types of things. And I don't want to say that that's a solution by any means, but going back to the city county manager's point, if further things begin to happen, I'm sure we will uncover and discuss many things, including perhaps the sale of that.
That's fine. Yeah, thank you. Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to ask you, as you said, obviously the biggest part of the budget is people. So in terms of your strategy, I assume we hope to avoid any cuts, hope to avoid any pain to staff as a leading priority as we go forward.
Yeah, that's certainly our number one priority, is to keep that as it is. That's something that we'll be working towards.
So a couple questions on that. What is, when you said merit pool recalculation, what does that mean?
Potentially looking at the amount of merit increases, from X% to another percent, capping that at a certain amount for meets and exceeds and that type of thing. So, we'll continue to look at that over the next month or two to figure out what percentage that is
The next year.
for 2026.
right.
Yeah.
And it's what 3 to 3.5% now? More than that?
It's
Correct.
5% now. Councilmember Cohen, up to 5%. And
That's
there
That's
are
the maximum, right? Is the mean or the medium
three.
Three, yeah.
Okay, so if you're looking at capping it, you're looking at 2, or, I mean, I'm just trying to get real
Yeah.
numbers.
Roughly.
If you try to not do that, or whether it's hold staff harmless, is that a proposal you could bring forward to show us, well, this is what we could do if we do a cut? Or this is what we can do if we hold employees harmless, to use that terminology?
I don't see that as a possibility at this point. With
To
the
not-
$6 million.
To not touch the,
Yes,
we're not considering any other options.
we're
because-
considering a bunch of different options. This will be a multi-pronged approach for a $6 million reduction. So we'll be looking at a lot of different things, and it's going to be a lot of different levers. But I think that's when that's going to need to be.
So along that lines, is there any consideration to, I mean, I'm not sure what our vacancy rate is now in terms of positions. And we're not fully employed. Every position is not filled right now, I assume.
Right.
So is there any consideration to holding positions open, reducing through attrition in order to lessen? Because it's obviously more valuable to us to keep our people than to lose them, or, you know, that's a higher cost.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something that we're looking at is the vacancy and whether or not they need to be hired. That position needs to be hired. So that's another option that we're looking at.
So when the budget folks bring their presentations, will they be giving us maybe options or things they propose in terms of what positions could remain open, or alternatively, what service cuts they could absorb or would propose? So we could see maybe the practical effect of what does a service level reduction mean in Department X, Y, or Z?
I don't think we're going to get that granular. Councilmember Cohen, this process that includes 19 of us to a hold harmless, and let me say too that, so this is very early in the process, and our team we have every single department head listening to this meeting. So I don't want to send any of them in any particular direction on, we're going to choose one department or over another, or holding positions. Everything is on the table. 6 million is a lot to solve for outside of federal cuts. The terminology of holding harmless is not a level of commitment that we're able to make right now. We don't know exactly where we are right now. Again, we're very early in the process.
Correct. And I don't want to clarify, I don't mean one department versus another. I'm just interested, if we're all in this, that if department heads are looking at what service level cuts mean, so people understand what that means. Does that mean fewer hours of the rec center, or we're mowing the grass less, or we're reducing capital improvement project, whatever that means, so people can fully understand what we're talking about? No more pots with plants on the corners, you know. That would be helpful, and I would think it would be helpful to start thinking about now by each department about holding positions open if they can, so we're in a better, we don't have to cut as much if that situation comes. So that's my question about that. One other question, sorry. And I've also another scenario, I mean, I trust Jeff knows as much as we do in terms of what the heck is going to happen. There's lots of predictions out there. What's the contingency if it's worse? I mean, the effects of the tariffs are just now starting to hit. I just had someone tell me they had a order come in that was $8,000 and then another $14,000 for tariffs. So they're now starting to see their orders come in with the effects of the tariffs, and that we're going to see that roll out throughout the rest of this year, unless the tariffs are lifted tomorrow, which is always a possibility too.
So Mayor Pro Tem, council members, Councilmember Cohen, you're exactly right. I literally every day, somewhere around 4:30, 5 o'clock, I start trying to figure out what happened yesterday or what's happening today. And we're all going to be doing that. And I mean that in the most sincere way possible, that we're going to pay attention that 60 days from now, when we really see what may happen with the tariffs and whether they're going to be put in place or not, we'll start understanding. But the reality is, and this is the part that we can escape is they have even the utterance of it and some of that preliminary work or some of those preliminary discussions that were made, even if they're postponed or deferred for a while, they are having a direct impact right now. We are likely going to see a different level of Christmas sales than we expected. And that's going to come both from the consumer side as well as the supply side. So when I say the consumer sentiment and consumer confidence has been eroded, it's the data. It's not something that this is, I am apolitical when I'm doing the work that I do. And so this will be the first year since 2008, even in the COVID, I didn't experience this, where I'm doing revenue forecast changes every month now. And that's what you're going to probably see come August, something different. And I don't know what it's going to be because I can't, there's no way to predict what's happening
Well,
right now.
that's why I'm curious whether there's it's wise to start holding positions open, planning now
And let me just
to
add
do that. So if it turns out better in 6 months, we can release
Yeah.
those positions.
So let me just add real quick and just as a reminder. So when I put up the revenue numbers that we're talking about, you'll notice once again, 2025 R, we see a $3 million reduction overall in this year. That's based upon what we know now. So what Graham is doing with the budget office and everybody in finance, what the department heads are looking at the instruction of the city county manager is it's not going to be easy, but that's something that might be able to be managed and handled. But some of those policies, and some of those actions are already being taken and already being thought about and done. And Manager Hoffman, I don't know if I went too far on that answer, but we were already in this process. This is not coming in 2026. This is now.
Everything's on the table. We've had numerous conversations weekly about what it looks like, anticipation, and finding that sweet spot of not going down the what if rabbit hole while trying to prepare as best we can.
And keep in mind, as a municipality and an entity, it's one thing to say we're keeping every vacant one frozen or something like that. But if that vacancy is in water and it includes a main break, there's some safety and health things that we need to layer in also. So it's looking at all that holistically.
Well, I mean, obviously we have to establish some positions are essential.
Right.
Some we have little wiggle room, but I also to Councilmember Lim, I thought she made an excellent point. We've been through this before a number of years ago, but we know where suddenly service demand goes up during a recession and where things maybe have to shift to support that. And it would be nice to see that scenario spelled out too. So we know that you're thinking about where the new demands will come in terms of more people who are maybe cut off Medicaid or don't have their SNAP or lose their houses or whatever other practical effects, job losses that may come through, the practical effect on demand for city services. So it would be great to be able to see that thought about in terms of the budget proposals that come when the budget department heads come back so that we can really visualize potential service adjustments.
Well, we're meeting with them on a weekly basis, all the department heads. So we're having these conversations all the time. So
Okay,
for
thank
sure.
you.
Member Marsh Holston.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Just one question on one area. On slide 15, it mentions the implementation of the ERP system in 2026. So my question on that is, we've been told many times that our current system is manual and therefore very labor intensive. We've also heard that it's likely that there's attrition. Anytime you move into a new system like that, there's going to be attrition. So kind of going off of Councilmember Cohen's question is, have we evaluated and estimated how much labor and costs we can save by moving to that ERP system and thus maybe not filling those roles that are being, people are leaving and that, saving money that way? Do we have an estimate of how much labor we're going to be saving when we implement that?
The ERP itself is not a cost saving implementation. it's a tool in which staff will be able to better serve, will have better reports, will have a lot of efficiencies, but I don't necessarily see those coming in the result of less staff.
Okay, because that doesn't really jive with what we've been told before. We've talked about new programs in the past. Let's take the trash, for example. Adding the opt-out is a manual process because we don't have the ERP system. So if we need to add people to implement those programs because our system is manual, how then are we not saving money by going into the ERP system?
Yeah, the ERP is not a cost savings endeavor. It is, maybe we would be able to, have the efficiency of not having to hire another person later on down the road, keeping staff at the same for a while, but this ERP is not that. And if you've talked to anybody about an ERP implementation, there are times where it takes additional staff to get it up and going. So although we'll have some efficiencies, I don't see this as we're gonna be able to lay off 3 people because we got a new ERP system. That's not gonna happen.
I understand on the implementation is intensive, the actual rolling it out, but once it's up and running and in place, I guess I'm still not understanding because in the past we've been told that our system is manual and therefore it takes extra man hours to do X, Y, and Z in the financial systems, billing, et cetera. I don't understand why we won't save money then by having the system in place. Sorry, not necessarily save money, but save man hours, I guess is the question.
I guess I've been through 2 of these, and although, you're right, there's certainly that implementation phase, which takes additional man hours. The reality is that we might save some man hours, but it's probably not going to be to the tune of people. Might be a half a person, it might be that we can, the next time we hire a particular FTE, it might be able to be a part-time versus a full-time, but these are not, these ERPs are not, 3 to 4 people where you're able to reduce staff. Like it's not like that. So, at this point, I'm hoping that we don't lose anybody because it's incredibly difficult on staff and it's a lot of hours. So yeah, I don't see this. It's certainly going to be advantageous for the organization as a whole, but to be honest, I don't think that it's going to save multiple people.
Okay.
Councilman Marshall, let me add some context on any ERP system. It's high value and it's accuracy and it's transparency. I don't think there's any community that transitions. I can remember having this conversation when we transitioned to Google, that we were going to become so fully automated that we wouldn't require those same positions. So from our finance department, we finally have a strong team, and not having them work weekends when they're pulling reports, not having them work 10 to 12 hours a day is super helpful, and having them be more adaptable when the high value conversations come to say, what are the trends? How do we forecast? What does this look like? Rather than doing the day-to-day calculations that will be transferred to the automated system. I don't know if that helps at all, but again, it's not a 1-for-1 on an FTE savings. And particularly when we're looking at solving for what we're solving for, 3 FTEs in any one particular department isn't going to get us there. So the investment in the ERP is a 20-year investment. We're certainly not looking at it that anybody in finance is going to be replaced by a technological system. You got to have people that run it.
Thank you. That's all, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
Okay, so I was going to go back to the 2027 and 2028 outlook looking more optimistic for revenue. That's probably for Mr. Romine. And then looking back at some of the tables in the past, we also anticipate new development starts to increase in 2027 and 2029. And then we've heard in the past that residential doesn't cover the full cost of services. And do you see, so does that increase in units? I'm assuming we still expect to see that kind of spike in units in those years. Does that offset and does that create any concern to the more rosy future as we hit those years?
Mayor Pro Tem, council members. So you can tell, I mean, I go out to 28 on this page. And so we're really focusing in that way. But what I did was I also looked at the same time, as I mentioned, I looked at what we're seeing from a development standpoint. So using what we're currently projecting and we anticipate coming forward, both on the residential side and the commercial side. So kind of understanding that. And recognizing that those impacts. So we're focusing in on these revenue sources. Again, part of the long-range financial plan, part of those impacts we talk about when they're negative or positive, references back to the cost of the services we're providing. So what we'll be doing, if you recall from our focus session back in February, this year is what we're working through is to adjust that model, to fix that model, to update the model on the cost side as well as the revenue side. So at this point, what we're trying to do is stay focused on the 26, but I have looked out to 27, 28, using that land use development that we're expecting, that we've been talking about, that have been either approved by city council or those key developments. So all of those have been incorporated into these revenue forecasts and talked about it, as well as the shares of money that we'll be providing to those developments. So if you recall, in all three of the major developments we're talking about, we do have pledges of revenue that will be going to them. So I've accounted for that in these revenues. Will we continue to adjust? Yes. But we're trying to be as holistic about this as we possibly can. I will tell you my dartboard, I'm less accurate when I think about 27, 28 or beyond than I am when I think about 26. So that's just the realities of the work that I do.
But it seems like it's been all accounted for in that.
I've done everything I can to account for what we can expect. There is, as I mentioned multiple times, there's a high degree of uncertainty right now that we have not experienced in this community or in this economy in this country in years.
That is completely fair. Okay, and thank you for all the additional information. My other question is related to the 3 bonds. And when you add that up with between the police department, the water tanks, the wastewater phase 1, it's like $244 to $254 million. Does that give us any concern with the new uncertainties? Those all have to move forward, I'm assuming, for various reasons. And is that, is there any caution that we should be considering as we're moving forward with taking on the new debt, or are we retiring enough debt that that's not a concern?
So the enterprise funds, it's not a concern. We've looked at that separately. That's kind of why we had a lot of those meetings and the rate increases from last year, so we could prepare well for that. So that is not kind of in the purview of the general fund, the sales tax and that kind of thing. We've addressed the user charges appropriately for those. The PD building, it's necessary. Luckily, we've got 20 years to pay that off. And so as we look towards 27, 28, we should be fine. And really won't hit our books until late 2026 will be our first payment. I think we'll be in good shape by that time, or shortly thereafter in 2027, and we can have that first payment. The first payment on that will probably be about $5 million. And so we're able to do that.
Okay, and thank you for that clarification also that only the PD is within the general fund. So thank you.
Councilmember Anderson, may I add, when we meet with bond counsel and when we meet with the credit agencies, it's the same, it's a similar cadence when this council decided to have a debt policy. So in years past, it was, although it's labor intensive when you're looking at how much you can afford. It's just like when a family looks at the amount they can afford for a house. Generally, it's significantly higher than the standard third, a third, and a third. So when we're looking at, we haven't taken on new debt since 2017. So the police building, once we are retiring the existing COPs in 2027, that's taken into account along with the increase in credit ratings, along with all of those revenues. The decision wouldn't be made to move forward with that debt unless not only was there debt capacity and room to pay, but on a 3-year, 5-year, 7-year, 12-year, 20-year, if there was indications that there would be something happening that we would not be able to pay for from a baseline perspective, that would certainly come into to consideration. So there's no rolling the dice when a municipality bonds, particularly when Broomfield bonds, because again, those credit ratings, that's one of the very first KPIs under the fiscal sustainability is we're not messing with the bond ratings. And we're not looking ever at tapping into those reserves. So the revenues have to generate enough in order to secure and pay for that bond payment, not only this year, not only in downturn years, but for the next 20 years as well.
Okay, thank you for that additional information. And that is all the questions I have.
Mayor, I wanted to add quickly, this is the number of department heads that are listening. I have like 7 text messages right now. But the long bill was just passed, and Department of Human Services did get an increase, as did Workforce. Just for those questions about Human Services and Workforce.
Councilmember Hinkle.
Thank you, Mayor. Lots of good questions tonight, and thank you for the preparation of all of this and the constant communication. And I really appreciate all of the planning and effort that's gone into this. These are some really good questions tonight, like I said, and the impact to our workforce and health and human resource or health and human services is going to be pretty big. I will add, and this is just more direction, I guess, than anything, as far as I would like to see just making sure that our training isn't suffering though. So I know that PD has to have sort of mandatory training as far as like state legislature requirements. I know that you guys are really diligent about like what is required. And then also with the transfer to the new systems, the ERP, I think we need to make sure that we have trainings for that because that'll affect, I'm assuming, all departments. And is there a plan for that training? I guess that is my question. What does that training look like? And do we have any estimates on costs? And if you don't, that's fine too.
I'll take that. We're right. Actually, Graham and his crew, and there is about 67 people that are on the champion team for the ERP, Councilmember Hinkle. They've been working on it for almost 25 months. We are at the place now to where we are hearing demos for those ERPs. The training and rollout, one thing that we've gotten very good at over the last 4 years is that you have to have the change management. You have to have that psychological component along with the technical component. So the rollout and the training is going to be as significant as it is the selection module. So they have I don't even know how large that handbook is. And that is for that rollout, for that adaptation. And it's not new information of what's going to happen. That's why it's so important to have that number of individuals on the front end that are looking at those systems. So we have SMEs, we have champions, we have rollout subject matter experts. We have identified project managers that are solely significantly for ERP. It is a full court press for this organization.
Great, thank you. And is that in-house training or are we bringing people from outside sources for that? Or what does that look like?
It's a combo. Go ahead, Grant.
It is a combo. We've got a great project manager team, which lives in IT. We've got 3 of them. They are very good at training also. So we'll have implementers of the software come in and help us implement and make decisions based on their own software. And then when we actually come to user training, we've got a great PMO team that will be helping us roll that out all over. But yeah, like City Manager Hoffman said, we've got 67 people that are intricately involved. We've got a pit crew, it's called. And so we're right in the middle of this and we are hot and heavy and we sat through 24 hours of demos this week already, trying to make sure that we make the best decision because we will have the software for the next 20 years, 15 to 20 years.
And, okay, thank you. I have other questions down the road about that, but thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Nguyen?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. I just have really one question, and that's, I think it was very well put that these uncertain economic times it's hard to really budget or look into the future of the Broomfield budget, and obviously, when the discussion of going from stable to fragile to now fragile is concerning. I guess my question is, what are we doing in the budget to make sure that Broomfield stays actively competitive and also keeping economic drivers, making sure business and corporations are still here in Broomfield?
Manager Hoffman, if I could, I'll start with an answer here. So Mayor Pro Tem council members. So 2 things. I do want to come back to something that Graham had mentioned, and that is right now at the same time we're doing this, the city of Boulder is going through their budget revenue estimates, and they're doing almost the exact same thing we're doing tonight. Almost all of our other colleague cities are going through the same process. We happen to be in a pretty good position. But nevertheless, each community is seeing different kinds of revenue changes and probably talking about how they're going to affect their budgets going forward in the rest of 25 and 26. Going specifically to your question, though, one of the decisions, I don't want to say that we were fully anticipating this high degree of uncertainty in the economic conditions that we're in, but we did see that there were some changes that need to be made in the structure and the way that we were doing the work. So Manager Hoffman opened up tonight saying that I now have 1 title after having many. And part of what we knew going forward is the challenges around business development. Because of what we were talking about with Interlochen that we shared with the council in March, what we're talking about from a commercial standpoint, the changes that are going on that we even began to see from the standpoint of how work is going and how we shop now. All of those things combined so that Manager Hoffman and Deputy City and County Managers Casey and Bertonzetti said was, hey, Jeff, why don't you focus over here for a while and let's bring in somebody that's going to spend all of their time and not be distracted by some of the other work assignments that I have. So Robert Smith is here in Economic Vitality, he and his team, and he's about to bring in the 3rd member of the business development team. I think that person starts in roughly 2 weeks, if I recall. So they are wholly focused on how do we fill these spaces? How do we bring those vibrant restaurants? So they'll be working not just with myself and others within the city, but also working with some of our developers as well as our catalytic projects, making sure that those get a strong lease up. And then as we actually are about to have, I think it's next week, I've scheduled a meeting where Robert and the planning, Lynn Merwin and I are going to talk about how do we start thinking about what we're going to do for solutions to what we're talking about with Interlochen and the office market. So all of that has been thought about, and that's part of the reason for Robert and his team to be really solidified. Manager Hoffman or Deputy City County Manager Bertonzetti, because Robert works for Anna. I don't know if you want to add anything to those comments.
Well said. Thank you so much for the question. Obviously, the concerns for tariffs, so on, but I think you addressed them pretty well, and I appreciate the council members for asking their questions as well. Those are my questions that I have. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Any other council member questions, comments, thoughts? I know we're all kind of kicked into problem solving mode, which was probably annoying because it's things you guys are already talking about, but it's human nature. Here's an idea. I just found $13,000 we could cut. No, I'm just kidding. But we appreciate the information and yeah, it's a little sobering. So it's good to know what we're up against and just as, you know, we're in my own household, it's kind of the season of love what is, don't buy anything. So on that, is that it for the good of the board? All right. Well, thank you all for the discussion. That concludes the agenda items on this evening's study session. If there being no further business, the study session is adjourned. Thank you.